Does the origin, evolution, and structure of the universe point to a god or not? Today, we're going to be discussing cosmology from both a theistic and atheistic perspective. Welcome to another episode of the Bordering on Belief podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Luke Barnes, an astrophysicist from Western Sydney University and the author of A Fortunate Universe, Life in a Finely Tuned Cosmos, and The Cosmic Revolutionary's Handbook. And also Dr. Ethan Siegel, astrophysicist and now full-time science communicator, author of several books including Infinite Cosmos and The Grand Cosmic Story. So we're going to be discussing 6 well-known or less well-known arguments that both theists and atheists use to support their positions, which all relate to cosmology in some way. We're going to start off discussing 3 theistic arguments and then move on to 3 atheistic arguments. And what we're interested in is just getting your take, your evaluation of these arguments from your differing perspectives. I think it'd be really helpful if we just start off with each of you just briefly summarizing where you kind of come from on the God, no God question, just so our listeners know where you're coming from. Luke, do you want to just tell us where you're coming from?
So yeah, I'm a theist. I'm a Christian of that variety of theists. So that's where I come from. I think that there's a bigger story than just the physics of this universe. Although as a physicist, I obviously love the physics of this universe. It's rather lovely.
Okay, thank you. And Ethan?
I grew up as a Jew in New York, and I came to atheism pretty early on in my life. And I think I've always sort of had an appreciation for both perspectives of the notion that where we exist is beautiful, intricate, obeys laws, and can be understood. And that seems to, it seems to me that indicates that, if it is all random, we sure did get very, very lucky. But I also tend to draw my conclusions based on what can be demonstrated, what can be shown with evidence. And so my belief in things has never risen past the levels of agnosticism where I would call myself a deist. But I do entertain those thoughts regularly, even though I most typically describe myself as a Jewish atheist.
Right, let's get straight into it. The fine-tuning argument. Luke, do you want to just tell us a bit about what the fine-tuning argument is and why theists use it to say that a God exists?
So very briefly, this one wasn't sort of invented by theists. Physicists started looking at the structure of the theories that we had at the time, and you can only ever deal with what you've got. And there were these numbers in there. So Feynman, for example, said all physicists should put this one number, the fine structure constant, up on their chalkboard and worry about it. Where do these numbers come from? The mass of the electron and things like that. And what was discovered was physicists started to say, well, what if they'd been different? What if they just, been this value or that value? We can do that in our equations and ask questions like that. And rather than just getting a different universe that was sort of a bit like ours, but, maybe things were a bit heavier or a bit lighter or whatever, there were these weird kind of disasters that happened where suddenly structures that hold fast in our universe fall apart in these other universes. And I think the intuition here is something like that we see a universe around us, especially if you're an astronomer, you get to look at these wonderful pictures of the universe all the time. And, there's a sense of there's something pretty amazing happening around here. Is there some deeper story than just the matter and energy of this universe? And the fine-tuning argument says, well, let's go look at some other universes just to sort of calibrate ourselves a bit. And those ones all seem to be, well, not all, but there's a lot of disasters out there. So there is something interesting, something seemingly rare about the universe that we see around us. Now, that's not to say we should just stop science and say God did it and God set that value and that's all there is to it. We're just trying to get just a feeling for, is the amazing stuff we see around us, is that just typical in any old universe? Or does it perhaps point to a story that's bigger than just matter and energy and laws and equations? And that's the instinct behind the fine-tuning argument.
And just to clarify one more thing on that, is part of it the absolute astronomically unlikely statistics or probabilities we're talking about here?
It looks like it takes a bit of work to get up to probabilities. That's I'm happy to do that work, but the instinct there would be we see within the equations an awfully large set of possibilities, say the value of the cosmological constant. And we see that an awful lot of that space seems to be occupied by universes that they're mathematically fine and they're physically simple. They just expand and no two protons ever touch each other. It's just those sorts of universes seem to be any old universe. And so ours is doing something very different from that.
Ethan, what are your thoughts on fine-tuning as an observation and then fine-tuning for life as a justification for thinking that there is some sort of divine mind behind all of this?
Well, first, I would like to heavily recommend Luke Barnes's book, A Fortunate Universe, to anyone who's interested in this question, because him, along with his co-author, Geraint Lewis, they give an excellent treatment of fine-tuning, and they do talk quantitatively about how much you could vary a variety of the constants by and still obtain a universe that we would recognize, because it would still have atoms and stars and would admit the formation of rocky planets within a reasonable cosmic time. And, I read that book and I came away with the conclusion that actually you can actually vary many of these constants by quite a bit, especially if you're willing to vary them in tandem with one another, and still obtain a universe where things like life and human-like observers are possible. But what I usually do when I come upon a thing like this is I ask, I try to want to put things into the realm of physics. And the way you bring something into the realm of physics is you ask how. How does it get to be the way it is? How does it get to, in the case of the fundamental constants that govern the universe, or the rules and the system of equations that govern the universe, is we ask the question, what is the mechanism by which these things are set? Right? If we talk about what is the mechanism behind the values of the fine structure constants, or the value of any of the fundamental constants, we don't actually know. We don't actually have a physical theory for what sets these. The closest we have is we can make some appeal to, well, if you bring everything all the way up to the Planck scale where the laws of physics break down, then there's a chance that that's where, when you go up to those energies, that's what set the laws of the universe, and that's what set the constants that define the universe. And so we don't know what actually sets the constants of the universe. We don't know what actually determines the laws that we have and why we have those laws and not another variation or version of laws that we can have. So I think when you start to consider those options, you have a set of universes that can admit observers, intelligent observers, like we, maybe perhaps a little bit vainly presume ourselves to be. And then we say, okay, well, all of the universes that don't admit intelligent observers as even a possibility of existence, of course we don't live in any of those, because we wouldn't be here to observe it. No one would. So I don't really look at this as an argument that can conclusively tell you whether there is something more than the nature we know to our universe, or if there is, whether that thing that is more to nature than the universe we know is divine in any way, or whether it is the result of spontaneous symmetry breaking or a random process or something else. What we do know is that at the energies inflation achieved, at the energies the hot Big Bang achieved after the end of inflation, we don't approach the Planck scale. We don't reach the Planck scale. We don't reach the theoretical scale at which these constants or these laws could be set. And so if you're saying, where do these things come from? I say that's a great question. We should try to physically investigate it. I don't see the need for a conclusion that either supports or refutes divinity in this. I see this is a physical puzzle that we should be using physics to try and address.
Thank you, Ethan. So, Luke, a few points Ethan made there. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, I certainly think we should be continuing to do physics. But there's got to be a limit to if you say we don't know why it's this way rather than some other way, so we should do more physics. That story's got to stop. Either it stops somewhere or it doesn't, and both of those are pretty alarming possibilities. So Sean Carroll summarized it as follows: there's a story which gets down to the ultimate laws of nature and then stops. That's when all of your physics is done. Right, unless you think somehow sort of Max Tegmark style, that every possible physics is real, or every bit of mathematics is really real, or something like that. There's a way the world is, and there's a way, the world, the way the universe is, the way the universe could have been, and, we're always, at some point, physics is going to run out. Maybe not in our life, maybe no human being will ever reach that limit, but there's a way the world is, and then that's all you get from physics style explanations. So I think what fine tuning says is, okay, so a naturalist like Sean Carroll's going to say, all right, when those explanations run out, we're done. Just shake hands, high five, head to the pub. Great work, everybody. We've gone as far as we can go. And I think fine tuning says, well, let's just, for a second here, just pretend that the laws we know about are the end of the story. Let's just pretend we got there. We didn't. We haven't. We're going to keep doing physics. I've still got a job, but let's keep going. I mean, let's just look at what we've got and say, well, if we were just staring at these laws and this was just the way the universe is, would we be happy to just high five and walk away? And the answer from the fine tuning is, well, no. There's other ways the universe seemingly could have been are extraordinarily different to ours, in that they almost certainly couldn't support life. So I see this not as, let's stop doing physics. Of course, we're going to keep doing that, but let's have a sort of a practice run, a trial of just getting outside that. Let's look for another physics explanation, and instead let's see if we'd be happy to say this is just how it is, and don't ask any more questions, and physics will answer all of our questions, and that's the end of it. So that's my sort of bigger picture on this. I think there certainly are people out there who take the fine-tuning argument to be, stop asking questions. These constants were set by God. That's not the way I try and do it. But that's the sort of instinct here that if we discovered tomorrow, right, if the heavens opened and we discovered there was a God behind the laws of physics, it would explain some stuff about why, amongst all the other possibilities, a life-permitting universe exists.
Yes, Ethan, is this really a question of whether we stop at physics or actually we go to a metaphysics? I mean, I think Luke's talking basically about a deeper understanding of why physics is the way it is. What do you think about
Well,
that?
I mean, we would love to understand that W word you use, the why, but physics doesn't answer those questions, and it doesn't pretend to. Physics answers the question of how. And I try to be very explicit about that when I talk about issues like this. The idea that we'll get down to this Carroll-esque, we've discovered all the physics there is to discover about reality, is very foolish, in my opinion, because we don't discover the ultimate laws of reality or the ultimate nature of reality. That's not what we do as physicists. What we do is we come up with the best approximation of those laws of that nature that we can, with the full suite of data that we have. And so when we get to the best approximation of reality that we can ever get to, assuming we get there, again, as Luke said, I don't think it'll be in our lifetimes either, we won't know. We won't know that we've reached the best level that we could ever reach based on the data we can collect in our universe. And I think it's always worth to speculate, to consider what are the possibilities, what are the other possibilities, what are the things that could be out there. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but you shouldn't confound yourself by telling yourself you're doing something meaningful about science or you're doing something meaningful about gaining knowledge. All you're doing is you're exploring possibilities that either you can test scientifically, in which case you have a chance to learn whether they're valid or invalid, or that you can't test scientifically, in which case, like you said, you're doing metaphysics. And if you think metaphysics is valuable, or you think metaphysics has no value, that's up to you. I think if you ask Luke and I, though, that question, you might get two very different answers, but we both care very much about reality. And physics is the way to investigate that.
There's the line, right? I mean, would it add anything to add a metaphysical, a bigger than the physics of our universe, or the physics of the universe, or is there any value in adding that to your picture of reality, your worldview? And I think that's where we disagree. For me, it's going to answer that question of why ultimately it's this way rather than some other way it could have been. But for other people, it doesn't seem like it's going to add much. So if the fine-tuning argument at least sort of brings you face to face with, you're like, what would I do? I don't think we ever could, as Ethan said. I think he's completely right. we're never going to look at a set of equations and be absolutely certain that that's the last law of physics we'll ever discover. Sure. But what would we do if we were ever faced with that? And I think if the fine-tuning argument gets us thinking about that question, I think that's very valuable.
Next one, the cosmological argument. Why, what is the origin of the universe? If it did have an origin with the Big Bang, tell us about why that is used by theists as an argument for God.
So there's actually a whole bunch of versions of the cosmological argument. But we'll focus on one of them called the Kalam argument, which is very, very simple. Anything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. That's stage one. Stage two says, well, if you're the sort of thing that, if something is the sort of thing that causes a universe, causes all of space and time and physics and matter and energy and all of that, what sort of being could do that? And it then, on the basis of philosophical arguments, argue that any sort of reality that could do that would deserve the name God. Or at least God is an extremely good candidate for that. But between two cosmologists, the sticking point here is probably going to be that premise of, does the universe have a beginning? Now, at this point, I don't treat these arguments as proofs in any sense, but especially this one. There's a massive question mark as we go back in time in our universe. We can use the physics we know today to start extrapolating back in time, but things get hotter and hotter and hotter. And at some point in the early universe, you can start, ticking off things like this. At this time, we've never seen any particle in our colliders that's that hot. And then go a bit earlier, we've never seen any particle even in cosmic rays that's that, energetic. And at this very early time, we haven't even got a theory to tell us what happens. So yes, there's a question mark here. So all I'd say about this is, if our universe doesn't have a beginning, if there's no sort of, and we can, physicists after Einstein like to define time just in terms of clocks ticking. If there's a maximum number of clock ticks there ever could have been for a clock in our universe, let's put it that way. Ignore the fact that the universe might destroy the clock, but never mind. If our universe really is infinitely old, it's doing a phenomenally good impression of a universe that had a beginning. Right? Even with theories like inflation, it still looks like, thanks to various theorems and their theorems, so you can get out of them with this, that, and the other. But our universe really looks like the sort of, it has all sorts of features to it that look like it's finitely old. The history of the way these ideas have developed over the last sort of century has really been cosmologists, put forward a model of the universe to try to explain the data, and they find within that model that it has a beginning, and then people start to say, well, how could I change that model to try and get rid of the beginning? And we're in that stage of beginnings turn up where we don't want them, and not beginnings turn up where we put them there. And that's not a proof of anything, right? Because we still, there's a massive question mark at the start, all of that. But I think it's worth, again, I think this question is valuable. This sort of argument is valuable, not because it's a proof and not because at all we should stop doing science. But again, it's going to get us face to face with the sort of bigger question that science can raise, which is, all right, suppose we did know that there was a beginning. Suppose it looks like, the universe just is, in the sense that it just came into being. Well, if you don't think there's a bigger story than just physics and that, then again you're left with the universe just is moment, and you go face to face with it. The universe just is. Even if it's infinitely old, it still just is. It's just any old universe. There's no deeper reason for anything. So I think, again, it's not that there's proof here, but the way our universe looks should get us thinking about these very deep questions about, can I just accept a universe as physics describes it, at the limits of what physics could possibly describe? Or is there room for and benefit from, intellectually, thinking that there's a deeper, broader picture behind that story of physics?
I do want to say I agree very much with Luke's very last point, that you have to decide for yourself whether it's worth thinking about these questions or not. And if you do, by all means, you should be exploring them. You should be thinking, is there more to what we see, to reality than we can observe, than we can experiment with, than physics can tell us. It is worth considering that and thinking that, especially if these are questions that interest you. As far as the arguments for or against the existence of a God, I think the cosmological argument is by far the flimsiest, and yet it's one of the most common. I think it's by far the weakest of all the arguments. When Aquinas put forth this cosmological argument for the existence of God, he used a cosmology that was completely discredited. So do most of the people who argue about it. They use an outdated version of the Big Bang that doesn't have cosmological inflation. They appeal to something like the Borde-Guthrie-Lincoln theorem without looking at all of the examples or limitations that either contradict or circumvent that theorem. For example, the version that was presented to us was, oh, well, the universe exists and everything that begins to exist has a cause. No, stop right there. No, it does not. You know quantum mechanics. You know all sorts of things that are random processes and that they come into existence. Did they have a cause? What caused it? Well, these are just the laws of quantum mechanics. They're random. Things happen at random. There's no cause to it. This is just what happened. What caused my radioactive atom to decay? Well, it just decayed after this amount of time. Why? Why this time and not some other time? Because those are the rules. That's not a cause. It just happened. Sometimes things just happen. That's what the laws of physics tell us. You want to find something where you can predict how that atom decays or when exactly that atom decays? It'd be wonderful. It'd be a revolution in physics. But no, things happen without causes. Things happen uncaused because they just happen. Then you say, well, the universe exists and therefore it must have had a cause. Sure, just like a radioactive atom decays. What's the cause? You don't know. How can we determine when it came into existence? Oh, maybe it was a quantum fluctuation. Oh, well, that's great. What does that gain us? Nothing. How does that respond to this argument? Look, you can go back and say, we can use the laws of physics to go back as far as the laws of physics can take us. That's what we do. There is no room for inserting an unnecessary God at any point along there. I just go back one step further and I say I don't want to insert an unnecessary God into there either. And I think that's the end of the argument. I think if you say, oh, well, there must be a transcendent first cause that created this universe and the laws in it, and God, I'll say, well, according to you, that must. You put that must there. In fact, I would go as far as to say your limited imagination for the other possibilities put that must there. So I would say, look, we go back and you can say the Big Bang. Yeah, but the Big Bang wasn't the beginning because we have cosmic inflation. We have several independent lines of evidence that have confirmed cosmic inflation and rejected the Big Bang without inflation. And then you take inflation back and you say, oh, but we have the BGV theorem. Yeah, but what that says is it does not say the universe must have begun a finite time ago from a singular state. It says the universe is past time-like incomplete, which means the inflationary state cannot be arbitrarily extrapolated back and that some other state must have caused it. Well, inflation is a state of exponential expansion. So if you go back in time, you get closer and closer and closer to zero size, but you asymptote to it. You never reach it. So what could have come before? And you could say, BGV, it must be some other state. Or you could say, well, what if it's a bouncing cosmology? Or what if I learned calculus and I remember when you do an integral, you don't just get the antiderivative of what you integrated, you get an antiderivative plus c, plus a constant. So if I go back and I say, oh, but I'm going to add a constant to it, well, now my universe is perfectly fine. That's a complete space-time. I don't need a finite time ago beginning. So, when I say these are the possibilities that physics gives us, I say, well, why do you assume you know the answer? And why do you assume that the answer is, oh, and this is the answer that proves a God? There are lots of other possible answers. I don't see a compelling cosmological reason to think, and it favors God. I think that's something we put there. That's not something that the evidence puts there.
Okay, Luke, not everything needs a cause, and the universe may be infinitely eternal. It may not have a beginning.
Yeah, a couple of things there. Yeah, lots to answer. I wonder if I should own up to being I'm taking a long sideways glance at Bohmian mechanics. I think there is an interpretation of quantum mechanics which is entirely deterministic, but let's leave that aside for now. That's a much longer conversation.
Have you looked into the PBR theorem, Luke?
Yeah, I
2012,
don't.
the
So yeah, I
Timothy
don't think that
Barrett.
affects it. Yes.
Okay.
Yes is the short story. I don't think that affects it.
So not everything needs a cause, Luke.
Even if that's true, that's the rules of our universe. But we're trying to sort of talk here about, this is the in one of his books, Stephen Hawking pointed out, the universe exists because there's a law like gravity, and a lot of people, and myself included, think that sort of puts the cart before the horse. Something has to exist before there's a law that describes how it behaves. So, why does the universe exist at all? I think is the big question behind the cosmological arguments. With the Kalam argument, again, the point I was trying to make was not that there's a proof here, but that I think looking at our universe should give you a sensation that it is sort of profoundly contingent. That it doesn't, it's the sort of thing that didn't have to exist, and if you can face up to the sort of big question of why is there anything at all, why is there a universe at all, why are there laws of nature at all, even why are there quantum mechanical laws at all, if that's that quantum mechanical uncertainty is the origin of the universe. I think if I mean the fact that our universe looks sort of like it has a beginning, or at least popular theories, even inflation. Yes, there are possibilities, a way to get out of that, but that's sort of my point. You've got to thread the needle a little bit to find a way for the universe not to have a beginning. But those possibilities are there. I acknowledge that. But I think there's a bigger picture here of the universe just doesn't look like the sort of thing that had to exist. So if you're looking for, if you think the universe has reasons and explanations and rationality behind it, you're going to have to look beyond the very contingent way that our universe is. Again, I know a lot of philosophers and theists who have defended this argument have tried to shortcut the process of doing cosmology and exploring all the options. I'm well aware of that. That's why I don't think this is a proof. But I think it is, if you thought the universe just is and always was and is just here and that's all there is to it, the fact that it's such the early universe at least is such a tumultuous place, a place of contingency, should have you ask those bigger questions. Certainly not shortcutting cosmology at all, but thinking hard about whether, again, there's a bigger story.
Ethan, did you want to add anything, or is it?
Well, I mean, the questions Luke are asking take me away from a cosmological argument at all, and instead are why. They're why questions. And I told you, physically, I have no answer for why questions because I don't ask them. Because when you start asking why, you're fundamentally saying I'm going into metaphysics. I'm not caring about what the physics is. And so based on what the physics is, I say, look, here's what we see. Here's what I conclude. Here's why this argument is flawed. That's it. I'm not saying that Luke is wrong, and I'm not saying that there isn't a why, and if you're interested in a why, you shouldn't think about it. But I don't want you to delude yourself into thinking that you are making a proof for the existence of God, or even making an argument that's based in cosmology for the existence of God. You're making an argument based on what you think the answer to a why question that physics has nothing to say about is.
So, Luke, again, similar to the last one, are we blurring lines here between metaphysics and physics and actually overstepping what physicists should be talking about?
We're certainly overstepping what physics can talk about. God is not supposed to be a physical thing. So these are philosophical arguments. There's no getting around that. I think the way to say this is maybe, from my point of view, physics raises questions that it can't answer. So either you look closely at the question and you say, oh, well, I guess I didn't want an answer to that, or maybe the question actually didn't make any sense in the first place. But the alternative is maybe there are answers beyond physics. But the whole point of these arguments is, again, not that you can do physics and then, oh, hello, there's God. Like there is a gap here. There is the physics raises questions about why there's a universe at all, why it's like this. And either you say there's no answer to those questions at that level, or you look beyond the sorts of interconnected answers the laws producing outcomes, those type of answers that physics can produce.
Ethan, is there, just on a personal level, is there a reason why you perhaps don't want to go into metaphysical questions?
Well, I would say, this is really about what we can know. And as soon as you start going into, okay, we can't know this, but here's what I think, or here's what I want to ask, it sort of tells me, like, oh, but like, we spent all this energy investigating reality, questions that were philosophical questions in the past. As soon as they became physical questions, as soon as they became questions that fell within the realm of science, all of that prior philosophy was useless. It was worse than useless. It biased us towards incorrect answers. It biased us by making us believe certain assumptions that weren't even foundationally true about reality. What Luke talked about earlier as, oh, there's some base level of reality here, that's the goal of physics, is to try and get down to that level and find everything you can about it. Many of the things we're saying now, talking about these theist arguments for the existence of God, or theist arguments, that support the existence of God, I'll say, these are things that if we come back 100 years from now, we might very well say, no, we have the physical answer to that. And it has nothing to do with the things we were arguing over. So that's sort of my resistance to it, is let's ground ourselves at physical reality. Let's ground ourselves where we actually have some knowledge or the prospect of obtaining that knowledge, and draw our conclusions based on that without resorting to, what I would say is sort of this appeal to metaphysics, or what I would call a lack of physical knowledge.
Right, let's move on to the third of the theist arguments, which is the intelligibility of the universe.
So this once again starts to look at the preconditions for us doing any science, doing any physics at all. So, I like to imagine, there's two parts to the scientific method, and one of them is I'm going to be as rational as I can, right, and try to understand what's going on out there, and that's all. I'm gonna use precise scientific instruments. I'm going to use the best mathematics I can find, and I'm going to try to find the patterns that are out there in the universe. Right, that's one part of science. The other part is the stuff that we actually discovered. Like, we did this for the last couple of centuries or more, and there's some things we really learned about the universe. And so those two things have got to come together. I just think of an old TV set, which is just showing static. And if you can design the best pattern recognition software you like to analyze the static, and you can test it and it can be absolutely perfect, and then you feed it with the static and it won't find anything because there's nothing there to find. This is the question of why is there any order, any interconnectedness, anything for science to discover at all? Now, we are part of the order of the universe, so there's a bit of an overlap with the fine-tuning argument here, and you can imagine a similar sort of answer. But beyond that, there's a quote I love from a physicist called Ed Hines, who was reviewing a book, and he said, the reason why physicists do physics is because we've discovered the universe is the greatest, largest jumbo crossword puzzle you've ever found in your life, and completely enthralled by the puzzle, we don't often stop to think about why we look at it and try to solve it at all. We have this feeling of discovery that underneath the universe, it's not just sort of a bunch of stuff thrown together, it's not a bag of rocks at the bottom, that there's sort of these elegant laws on the way down. And again, it's not that we're going to stop looking for deeper laws. It's precisely because I think there's a God that I think there are even more rational laws underneath. It's part of the reason I'm going to keep doing science. But again, let's try to think, why is any of this working at all? Why is there any laws for science to discover at all? And why, when we discover them, do they use such beautiful mathematics? One of the reasons I kept studying physics was because I'd heard these rumors from popular level books of the beauty of general relativity. And I thought, I'm not finishing my physics education until I get into general relativity. And I've got to say that decision was totally justified. It is awesome. It's the most wonderful thing. And so it's yes, keep looking for deeper reasons. But the thing is, what we think of as a deeper reason is going to be even more rationality, even more elegance, even more sort of beauty and equations down at that level. And so the question of why is there any rationality down there? Why is there any deep sort of beauty down there for us to discover in the first place? The progress of physics is only going to make that question more and more visible and confronting to us. We'll just find more as we go down. So again, could there be a bigger story there? The connection would be that whereas matter doesn't really care whether the laws it obeys are simple or not, there's no fundamental reason to think that's true. A mind can privilege simplicity, and so that would actually do some explaining. Not the sort of physics explaining, right? We're not doing physics here, but a metaphysics which actually does connect with the physics and explains why the physics does what it does.
This is probably going to surprise a lot of your listeners given my answers to the first two things, but I actually have an affinity with a lot of what Luke said about this. I was asked a few years ago what the most profound fact about the universe is. And my answer was the most profound fact about the universe is that it can be understood, is that it exists in a way where the laws of nature are consistent from one moment to the next, where they don't vary across space, they don't vary across time. They vary slightly with energy, but that's in an understandable way in the context of quantum field theory. Also, similar to Luke, when I was deciding to go to graduate school, I was working as a public high school teacher at the time. I had finished my degree, and that's what I was doing. And I was not fulfilled by it in the way that I wanted to keep doing it. And so I asked myself, what would you rather be doing instead? And I thought to myself, there are some big questions I always wanted to know the answers to, like what is the universe? Where did it come from? How did it get to be the way it is today? And what is its ultimate fate going to be? That wasn't a question for theology. It wasn't a question for poetry. It wasn't a question for philosophy. It's a question for physics. It's a question for the science of cosmology. And I realized while I was figuring that out that I can be a cosmologist. I could go to graduate school for this. I could learn about all of this. And it's true, the universe does obey these elegant, discoverable, intricate mathematical laws. It is some way and not some other possible way. What's very exciting to me at the frontiers of physics is probing for how. How did it come to be this way? How did it get to be the way it is? What would the consequences be if it were some other way? And this has led to all sorts of wonderful developments at the frontiers of physics that have taught us how the universe is and how the universe isn't. The fact that the proton does not decay with a lifetime of 10 to the 30 years has told us that the approach of SU5 grand unification is not correct. The fact that we don't have low energy supersymmetry particles appearing at the Large Hadron Collider, or that there aren't doublets of Higgses, that there's just the one Higgs boson, or that we don't have a composite Higgs, has ruled out many compelling extensions to the standard model. And so I think the fact that the universe is intelligible is a profound fact about our existence. And I think the way to honor that is to keep probing it, is to keep looking for what is that next layer of reality down from where we are. I think that may point to something divine, or it may not point to something divine, but it does point to there is more to discover that's out there. And that's up to us as scientists to investigate that in the most responsible way we can, to figure out the answer to that how question of how did the laws of nature come to be the way we observe them to be today.
Okay, so maybe we reached a point of common ground partially on that topic. So we'll leave that there and not disturb the piece on that one. And now we'll move on to three well known, I'd say, atheist arguments. So, Ethan, would you like to present the first one, which is about the universe being quite indifferent to life and hostile to life?
Well, I'll present this from the point of view I understand it, that if we look at what's out there in the observable universe to the best of our knowledge, we live in a universe that has existed for 13.8 billion years since the start of the hot Big Bang. We live in a universe that is occupied by more than 10 to the 21 stars, most of which have planetary systems around them, as best as we've been able to tell. There are clusters of somewhere between 6 and 20 trillion galaxies, according to the latest estimates, where big, massive galaxies like the Milky Way and Andromeda might hold most of the stars, but where it's the small, low-mass galaxies that are actually the most common galaxies in the universe. And yet, here on Earth, we remain, even in 2026, the only instance in the universe that we know of that has life on it. We have found no other worlds in the solar system that show signs of life. We found no other exoplanets or planets orbiting stars other than our own that show signs of life. We have received no signals from intelligent aliens announcing we are here that are definitive and unambiguous, or even at this point, very promising. And so that tells us, look, lots of things are possible. The ingredients for life are elsewhere. It will be wonderful if and when we do finally find life beyond our own solar system or beyond our own planet. And we have multiple ways to investigate that and hope for that. However, most of the worlds out there are completely dead, are completely barren. Most of the cosmos is unpopulated, has no life within it. What we are is the result of winning a cosmic lottery. But that cosmic lottery is governed by the laws of physics, is governed by the rules that all of nature abides by. There was no divine intervention necessary to create us. And it's very likely that whether it's primitive life, whether it's complex differentiated life, or whether it's intelligent life, it's very likely there are other examples of success out there, although we don't know whether they're rare or uncommon or quite common. So I think it's just saying the universe doesn't need anything more than the laws of nature to create us. Now, if you want to argue where did those laws of nature come from, that's a great question. We don't know. Luke doesn't know. I don't know. You don't know. None of your listeners know. We don't know. We would love to know the answer to that. However, the universe is incredibly hostile to life in general and does not really care about whether we exist or not. It does not appear, contrary to all of our historical things, where we thought Earth was the center of the universe, where we thought the solar system was the center of the universe, where we thought the Milky Way was the entirety of the universe. No, the universe is vast. The universe is, we occupy no special place in it. This is just the universe we have, and we are fortunate to be here. But that does not mean we were chosen divinely to be here. And I think when we do, and I think it's an inevitability, discover the existence of other worlds where life has formed on them, we will lose that position of privilege as well.
Yeah, I think this one, there's just two different perspectives here on the way the universe is set up. And I don't see how, if you want to tell a story where, the universe just is and it just does its stuff, and then we turn up at some random bit and here we are, and the rest of the universe looks like a place we don't want to live. And so it all looks sort of randomly thrown together. You can tell that story. I mean, from my point of view, the fact that there are laws that are the same today as they were yesterday, the same here as they were there, says that there is predictability about the way our universe turns out. Yes, there's quantum mechanics in there and we disagree about that sort of thing. But there's certainly, does the universe care about us? A historical point, just to start off with, there's this historical story where we put ourselves at the center of the universe because we're super duper important, and then science progressively kicks us out of the center. And if you read it, first of all, it's Aristotle who put us at the center of the universe, not any particular religion. He did that for what he thought were good scientific reasons about the way matter moves. And he didn't put us at the center, he put us at the bottom. That the whole point of those circles is it gets more perfect as you go out. All of the reason why Earth is at the center is because the crap settles to the bottom of the universe. We are, as Galileo said, the sump where the filth and ephemera of the universe collect, right? So we're not the privileged center, we're like the lowest bit. This is why in Dante, for example, the center of the universe is the middle of the earth, right? It's round. What's at the center of the earth in Dante? Hell, right? That's not the best bit of the universe, the worst bit of the universe. So there's this historical story there which doesn't quite hold together. So from my point of view, of course, God can make a universe in which everything unfolds exactly the way God wanted it to, and then here we are. I don't think the kind of randomness and chance in the universe that we observe rules that out. That's a longer argument, but I don't think that's true. And even if it, I don't think that rules that out at all. And so where one perspective sees waste and hostility, I just see like the rest of the universe that's not up. I don't expect me to be in a special position in the universe. I expect God to make a place for me to live, but I don't expect to be able to sort of swim through outer space and breathe the whole way to Andromeda. I don't know why I should expect that to be true. So I think there's just two different perspectives here. As a Christian, the size of the universe for me is just the best hope we have of having some visual image of the infinity of God. It makes me feel small because I am small, and that's the point. And this is not sort of us coming along after science has discovered it, trying to desperately hold on to the way we think about things. Psalm 8 in the Bible says, when I consider the heavens, the work of your hands, the sun and the moon that you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him? Right? We're small. Even that's Old Testament, right? This is before Aristotle. So I just think the way I view the world, nothing of that story that Ethan told. I admit that sort of holds together, and I get why you would see the universe that way. It just doesn't. It doesn't hit my view of the universe at all, and I don't think finding life out there or not finding life out there would particularly matter either. I see why this confirms that view of the world, but I don't see how it's supposed to hit me over here in my. I know maybe you just think I've made a little bubble for myself and insulated myself off from the universe, but there it is.
Yeah, I mean, Luke, your view is certainly not unique, and you're certainly other very, very smart people feel very similarly. The way you present your view reminds me very much of the way Alan Sandage presented his view, where he would look at the universe and he would look at the things he studied about it and discovered, and he would say, and it's all just too beautiful. It's all just too beautiful to be the result of random chance and random laws and random outcomes. And yet we know how chaos works because we're physicists, and we understand what a chaotic system planet Earth is. And we understand if you rewound the clock back 100 million years or 500 million years or 4 billion years to closer to the beginning of Earth, and you gave it almost identical initial conditions to what we had, the outcomes would have been vastly different. And because we understand that, I think having this outcome that led to us existing as individuals, as human beings on this world, it was a once in the whole universe chain of events that led to it. Now, was that designed? Was that purposeful? I think that's extremely arrogant of us to assume it was. I think this is how it unfolded here. And very, very likely, just like in any lottery, there were places elsewhere where it's unfolded. Probably very differently. I would be very shocked, for example, if we met aliens and they look just like us and they happen to be identical to human beings. If that happened, I might start to say, oh, geez, maybe there is some evidence for that the universe really was designed for things like us. But in the absence of that, and I'm going to assume that there's going to be a continued absence of that, the questions I prefer to ask are, when we talk about life elsewhere in the universe, what are the other prizes? What are the odds of winning those prizes? And as human beings, are we even the grand prize, or is there a grander prize out there that some species on some planet has achieved in the universe? I would love to know the answers to those questions, and I'm optimistic that maybe third millennium science will get us there and we will know those answers at some point.
Luke, any comeback on that?
Oh, just to say, the question of is there life elsewhere in the universe is by a mile the most often question I'm asked. No matter what I want to talk about, when I talk to a public audience, I get that question way more than any other, to the point where I actually had a talk recently. I was for various reasons, I was on a cruise ship giving a talk, and that
A life
talk
of an
I was going
academic.
to talk. I was going to talk about, yeah. Look, there are some perks. That I was going to talk about life, but the cruise got the talk got cancelled, and someone came and found me, like out there having lunch somewhere, and just sat down next to me. He just said, "All right, is there?" So I totally agree that that's a question we got to ask. We got to get out there and look at it. I don't find myself, as I meditate and think about my beliefs and try to think through them and whether they make sense. I don't find myself with a strong opinion theologically or theistically one way, or Christianly one way or another. So that for me, like, I don't really have a question about what the structure of matter or anything like that. So we this is science. We got to get out there and do it. I will notice that Ethan, because he's a good scientist, he said if you go back a billion years or whatever and you give almost the same initial conditions, you'll get very different answers. That's what chaos means. Absolutely, sure. But if there's a God in the picture, then it doesn't have to be almost. So
That's
there's
right.
just,
He could have said, no, 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 take that particle and just move it one Planck length over, and that's what it needs to be.
yeah, I think if there is a fact about the way the world is, and if I think there's a God, I've got that top-down view where there really is these facts exist, and the history of the universe existed in the mind of God before it existed in reality. And so again, if I have that belief, I'm not saying that you should look at the universe and immediately get that belief, right? I'm not. This is not my part of this, right? This is not my argument for God. I'm just saying, I don't find the contingency I see around me in the world evident against God.
Okay, well, I think we actually, without intending to, covered the second of the two arguments there, of the three arguments there, which was the randomness and contingency of existence. I think we've actually covered that quite well there. So let's move on to our final one, just because we're coming towards the end. The explanatory sufficiency and parsimony of physics. We mentioned it before, but which is a more parsimonious explanation? Accepting the universe as a brute fact, it just is, or adding God in as a brute fact as the deepest explanation of things?
Yeah, so this is to me why I've often in this discussion brought up things like inserting a God or adding an extraneous layer on top of the known reality, because you don't need any of it to get the universe we have today. There is nothing, I would argue, that adding a God into our conception of reality teaches us over the interpretation where you say, what if it's just reality? What if you just have reality, that these are the rules, these are the laws? You're always going to be left with unanswered questions, just like, evolution is a wonderful theory, and it's completely true, and it's highly descriptive of how species evolve over time through the mechanism of natural selection with random mutations. And as we've learned more about biology, we've like, oh, and it's rooted in genetics because there's a genetic code, and that genetic code in us is DNA and nucleic acids in general. And so we've refined that. But all of evolution does not address the origin of life. That's a separate field known as abiogenesis, the origin of life from non-life, and we don't know how that works. We have some ideas and we have some information, but we don't have a working theory of here's how life arose from non-life. Similarly, we don't know where the laws of physics came from. We don't know what led to the existence of space and time, whether they are eternal or whether they had an origin. And if so, did the laws of physics exist without them, or did they come into existence together? We don't know these answers. However, regardless of the answers to any of those questions, we have the universe with the laws of physics, with space and time, and with the energy contents of the universe that we have. You start with those initial conditions, those very general initial conditions, and you will get a universe that looks very much like ours. If you start with the laws of physics that we know and the ingredients that we know, you get a universe that looks a lot like ours. Maybe not identical in every way, because like I said, if you vary the initial conditions, you vary vastly the specific outcomes that you get. But this fully accounts for every observed phenomenon in the universe. 100 years ago, it didn't. There are things that we don't observe, that we do observe today, that we don't know how they're explained, that I fully expect within the next few decades or centuries or millennia, we will have a scientific explanation for. I think anything that you can explain without invoking the supernatural is an argument against invoking the supernatural. And that's the perspective that I have, and I think that's what this argument says, the explanatory sufficiency and parsimony of physics. That if you don't need to appeal to something beyond physics to explain what you see, what are you doing appealing to something beyond physics when you don't need it to explain what you see?
Okay. Luke, what do you say?
Awesome. Right. So there's a nice illustration here from a philosopher called Ed Fazer. And Ed Fazer says, look, you've got a big floor to clean. Right. So you get out your broom and there's a rug at the center. And so you start sweeping all the dust under the rug. Right. And this approach is highly successful. Right. So much of the floor has been cleaned. And so you think, well, if it's been successful so far, surely this approach will also help me to clean under the rug. And Fazer says, no. Think about what you've done, right? You took all the, you pushed all the stuff under the rug. So that same method can't help you clean under the rug. You just have to accept that there's dirt under there. And that's his way of saying, look, the way that physics has worked is that we've taken of course it's worked beautifully. That's why I'm here. That's why Ethan's here. And I can accept for the purposes of today that if you take these initial conditions and you take these laws, it will produce a universe that looks an awful lot like ours, right? What I'm saying is that what you've then got to do, the question we've got to ask ourselves is, would I be okay with a world view, a sort of an everything picture, which we all have, which just says those initial conditions and laws just are, and there's no more explanations to be had about them if they're done at the fundamental level, or if there are explanations, they'll just be more of initial conditions and laws. This is the crucial point. Of course, we don't know what they are now, and I don't know what they are, you don't know what they are, and we should do more physics to find them. But, the answer to let's sweep under the rug is not let's get another rug and sweep a rug under that rug as well, right? It's, rugs all the way down. The question here, the point I want to make here is really important. The kind of explanation that God is trying to be, whether there's a God or not, right? And I know a lot of Christians and a lot of theists will want to try to insert God. And that's it's entirely true that Ethan says, insert God in here. We just need God to sort of fire up life in the first place, or just do this, or just do that. I'm not making that sort of argument. I don't think, I think my guess would be, I'm firmly believe that there is a physical theory, a natural way that life originated in the first place. That seems very likely to me. Right? Because I think God has made a universe which all fits together beautifully. My one exception to that might be consciousness, but that's another story entirely.
We're not
I'm just a
going
bit
there.
confused
We have
about
other,
what the heck
we're not,
consciousness is, but maybe I'm wrong about that as well. The point is not to insert God. The point is to take the entirety of the picture that physics gives us and say, is this it? Or is there something different? Not inserted, added. Not sort of hanging off the top or off the side somewhere. A deeper foundation which answers deeper questions like, why is there a universe at all? Why are there initial conditions at all? And not assuming anything about beginnings. They can be boundary conditions. That's all right. That's fine. Why are there laws rather than no laws? Why are there elegant laws rather than not elegant laws? Why is the universe a way that permits life than a way that doesn't permit life at that fundamental level? The point is not to replace any physical theory. The point is not God versus science. The question is science will do its thing. Is the physical universe all that exists, or there is something else? It's not inserted into the picture. I don't take my equation of, Maxwell's equations and put a plus God at the end. Like, the question is, why is there an equation there in the first place? Now, I think there are clues that lead us in the direction of, if there was a God, that would explain some stuff. But they aren't going to be physics clues like a theory that's failing to produce this, or something about our universe that the laws can't do. It'll be precisely in the fact that there are laws and in the fact that they do such wonderful things around us that we'll say, look, there's a bigger picture here. As if you were sort of in a computer game and you could see all of the world around you and you thought, yes, every bit of this holds together. That's why I think there's a programmer. That's why I think there's more than just the laws I see around me. So the main bit of that I wanted to push back against was the picture of inserting. That's not what. Yes, there are people who want to insert God into, especially into evolution, right? But that's not what I'm trying to say here. I want to say is there a God not as an insertion but as a foundation?
So, Ethan,
The problem I really have with this, and I'm sorry that I'm familiar with Ed, because there are a lot of people that I have respect for in the philosophy community, and he is one of the people I've not had very positive interactions with.
sorry, who was that?
Ed Fesser. But the whole
Oh, right.
rug
Okay.
that you're talking about, the rug that you're accusing me of, you're sweeping all the stuff under the rug, is a deluge of why questions, which I told you the reasons for which we
Why?
do not ask those in physics. Why? I told you the reason why. And so all of your things you're accusing, you're sweeping under the rug, you're sweeping under the rug. You're asking questions that are outside of the floor. You're asking questions that aren't on the floor. So yeah, go ahead, ask all your why questions that you want. There's no floor there to clean the dirt off of. If you want to know what sets the initial conditions, I could say, well, cosmic inflation does because of the quantum fluctuations that get stretched across the universe. That provides the initial conditions. What about the energy scale of inflation? That gets set by the process of cosmic reheating, which is part of the physics of cosmic inflation. So you can ask, well, where does all this come from? Where do the initial conditions come from? We have answers as far back as our observations can take us. And then you say, okay, but I want more than that. And I say, that's great that you want more than that, but these are the limits of what we can learn. Look, there's a finite number of particles in our universe. The universe has existed for a finite number of amount of time. There have been a finite number of interactions between the particles in our universe. This is a finite amount of information encoded in this, and you are at some point going to hit the limits of what you can learn about the universe. If you ask me, hey, cosmologist Ethan, what happened before inflation? I can really only tell you what happened during the final 10 to the minus 32 seconds of inflation,
Ooh.
because anything that happened prior to that gets wiped out and doesn't get imprinted onto our observable universe by the nature of inflation. There's nothing that's going to stop you from saying, but I want to know, and you can't answer it because you run out of information. And so when I put God over there, you can't argue against me, because we're not talking about a God of a gap. We're talking about God off the edge of the cliff. You can talk off the edge of the cliff all you want. My point is, you're not doing physics and you're not teaching us anything about the universe. You're only telling us what you believe in the absence of evidence. That's faith. That's not anything more than faith. That's faith because you don't know and your gut tells you this is right. This is what Ed Fesser does, is he starts with the conclusion, and everything that he argues is based on, but I have to arrive at this conclusion. I don't think that's a good way to start an intellectually honest discussion. And so I think if you're going to say, we want to approach this from we're investigating it, we're thinking about it, we're comparing this possibility against this possibility, and let's see what we think when we look at the evidence, that's something I can at least get on board with the conversation. But if you're just saying like, oh, well, there's always a rug to sweep things under, and that rug is God, and if you don't see the rug, then you just don't understand, we're not going to get anywhere.
I'll jump in. So I think the point of the rug analogy is the following. I mean, it shouldn't be overinterpreted, but you said it there. Why are there the initial conditions of the Big Bang? And we can say, well, because of inflation. And now you've now got just different initial conditions. So the point is that a physics-style explanation is going to land us with something like boundary conditions, initial conditions, and some laws of nature. And if you say, what are the explanation of those laws of nature? If you explain them in terms of deeper laws of nature, you've now just got deeper laws of nature. So we're just always there with that same situation, right? Think about the sort of explanation that physics can offer. Glorious, wonderful, fantastic. Are we going to say that's the whole of reality? And yes, these are why questions, and physics won't answer them precisely because all it's going to say is if there were these initial conditions, if there were these laws, the result of that would look like the universe we have. So that's a good reason to think that those really are our level of initial conditions and laws. And we'll do more physics, and we might find these initial conditions are explained in terms of earlier initial conditions. And great, fantastic. But we're always going to be in this situation of what physics can offer us is if these initial conditions existed, if these laws existed, the universe would unfurl as follows. And that can explain so much. But yes, it's not going to explain our why questions, and physics won't, answer those. The question is, will I still have those why questions? Am I rational in wanting to say, look, whatever the initial conditions and laws are, they're going to be some particular thing. I'm not assuming the ones we know today are the initial conditions and the laws. Let's go do some more physics and cosmology, of course. But am I ever going to be satisfied with that, right? Or are these why questions I'm justified? I'm justified in looking for an answer. And if I find some simple metaphysical picture out there that would explain it, I think I've got a reason there. It's not a physics style reason. I'm not doing physics here, but I am still doing, I think, something rational, right? I'm looking for an explanation beyond what the style of explanation that physics can offer, because I don't think that's enough to explain these big questions. The alternative is not let's do more physics versus let's appeal to God. Right? I agree. I appeal to God. I want to do all the physics I can. It's great. Wonderful. Right? The question is, will a physics style explanation, at whatever level, will that be the sort of thing that could just be the ultimate end of, all explanations? Or can I find a different type of explanation which can underpin that one and explain some stuff about why the universe is this way rather than another way, why it supports life, why it exists at all, why it's mathematically elegant, and those sorts of things. So I agree I'm not doing physics, but I disagree that I'm just sort of doing my own preference here. I know what a satisfying explanation feels like, even when it's not a physics explanation. What properties it's supposed to have feels like was a bit too weak. No, stronger than that. What it should be, what properties it should have. So that's why I'm looking deeper.
I don't have that. I don't have a sense in me that says, oh, this is what it feels like when something is true and right and real and you can't prove it. That's what I don't know what that feels like. No, I don't know what that would feel like. How do you know something in the absence of evidence that would lead you to that knowledge? You don't. You only have your feelings to go on. And that's fine that you have those feelings, but let's not conflate those feelings with an argument for this is rational, this is reason, this is logical, this is supported by the evidence. It's none of those things. It's what you feel, and you're entitled to that. But let's not pass it off as something it's not.
Okay, I think those final remarks by both of you actually go to explain all the previous answers. I think we went to
Valid.
the deeper level of explanation of both of your positions there. So, okay, I just want to ask you a 20-second final question from both of you. Ethan, what have you learned from today's discussion that you want to take away?
I mean, the biggest thing is I'm so happy to get to have this discussion, to have a free exchange of ideas, to hear perspectives that aren't in common with my own, and also that to realize that both theists and non-theists alike recognize the absolute importance, beauty, and elegance of investigating the nature of reality as deeply as we can from a physical perspective.
Thank you, Ethan. And Luke?
Yeah, I was going to say roughly the same thing. I like keep doing science. I think my side has a bit of a bad reputation for we present these arguments as if all the scientists can go home now, and that's not it, right? These are separate, sort of deeper, more foundational issues. But of course, let's keep. It's precisely because I think there's a God that I want to look deeper at the way the universe is made.
Luke Barnes, Ethan Siegel, thank you both very much for joining us today.